Here's the Indie Show. I'm Tim Senna, coming up to 8 o'clock, which means it's time to call our extra special guest. This incredible album has turned 15 years old this year. And honestly, it's going to be an absolute privilege for me to speak to the driving creative force behind it, Peter Silverman. So let's see if we can get him on the line now. Hey, Pete.
Hey, Tim. How's it going?
It's going really well. It's so amazing to talk to you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. So where are you talking to us from? Are you out in New York still, or somewhere else out in America at the moment?
Yeah, I'm home. I'm at my in my studio in upstate New York.
That is amazing. That is amazing. It must be cool to have a studio in New York. How's the rent there, though? Because I know I watch a creator called Casey Neistat, and I think his rent is quite high on the studio he has.
Well, when I was based down in the city, we had a studio down in Brooklyn, and I mean, that rent was actually pretty reasonable considering what that space was like. It was a pretty big, spacious studio that was totally built out already before we got there. And now, still reasonable. I'm working out of a small space here, so I think I managed to do a lot with a small amount of space and keep things pretty reasonable. But I'm upstate, so costs are a little bit lower than they are in Brooklyn, I think.
That is cool. That is really cool to hear. I think the first thing I'd probably like to say to you in person is just thank you for your music and your album. I remember actually in 2021, I sent you a message after I ended a relationship. And it was one of those relationships where I think I started to relate maybe a little too closely to Hospice. And it was an album that helped me get through it. And you sent me a really sweet reply. So firstly, thank you. And I'm guessing those messages actually with an album like that, they're probably quite regular for you at the moment.
It comes and goes. And also just thank you for writing me and for sharing a bit of your experience with me. I think when the record first came out and was gaining steam, I would get quite a lot of those messages, and now it's more of a steady
they filter through
flow of them. Yeah. But yeah, it's still really encouraging.
Yeah.
To hear people continuing to relate to the record so many years later.
Absolutely. And I guess to go through something like that would put you in a position to write an album like that, and then to know that people who are in a similar position could take strength from it, it's probably the most healing thing in a way that you could go through cathartically.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was younger and the situation was very fresh for me, at least like what inspired the album was very fresh for me, it felt vindicating. Because I think part of the purpose in writing it and releasing it was, and I think this is the case with a lot of personal art, is that you've maybe gone through an experience that feels alienating or isolating, and you want confirmation that someone else has felt this way before.
Yeah.
And I think when there was such a huge response to it back then, that was immensely vindicating and validating for me. And then I think all these years later, I think it just it helps me reinforce that there are things about this record and this story that have endured. And even if I'm not in a place in my life where it is where I need it in the same way, that people who are coming up through their own relationships and their own either adolescences or just dysfunctional situations at any age, that it might still be speaking to them, is it makes me feel good about it.
Definitely. For the benefit of those in chat who are watching who don't actually know Hospice, I will summarize it as best I can. Peter can of course chip in, but the album is a concept album, and it's a metaphor for an abusive relationship, an emotionally destructive relationship, told through the story of a hospice worker who falls in love with a terminal cancer patient. Is that about right? Do you think in your words?
Yeah, well put.
Well, thank you. So I felt, funnily enough, that I knew the album growing up from way before, when I was so young, when I was a child, so too young to kind of understand a relationship like this could happen. So it was funny when I almost found myself, I think, in one. It was something familiar that I saw in a new light, and I was able to then take a lot of strength in. And it's so strange. Like, I remember having an argument with my partner, and she was a lot smaller than me, but there was a light on in the room, and it was like casting a shadow that was huge in the background. And I think I was like reflecting on that moment, and I think it kind of really made me understand how vulnerable and powerless you can feel in those kind of relationships, which is maybe for some people surprising as a guy. If you're the bigger person and your partner is smaller than you, people might not assume that you can be in a position where you're being emotionally abused or damaged. But yeah, that's that image. I was almost laughing at that point, because I was like, this is like something I would hear in a hospice lyric. We're having this
I mean, that's a very like poetic image you're describing.
Yeah,
it's very powerful. Yeah, I mean, I think when I put out the album, I remember on some level feeling embarrassed about that aspect that you're talking about, which I guess just back then, not to say it wasn't something that was talked about back then, but maybe not in the realm of, let's say, indie music.
Yeah, for sure.
So to come out and to be a guy and be expressing this kind of weakness and what felt like weakness at the time and vulnerability, I think was scary to do and felt unusual. And I was singing in a high falsetto. There were things about it that kind of I think just sort of, I want to say this the right way, but I think that it kind of degendered it a bit.
Yeah.
In a way that I was. I don't know if it was empowering at first. It was a little bit scary to kind of to walk out on that plank a little bit.
For sure.
If that makes sense.
I actually think in a way it shows a really underrepresented and beautiful side to masculinity, because you don't often hear a male singer even kind of speaking in that way, and I think it shows the kind of the caring side and perhaps the vulnerability. At least I find as well, for you obviously being in the eye of the storm of the situation, it might be hard to find it empowering in the short term, but I think when you get towards Wake and some of the affirmations in that song, it is a very empowering album, like a mantra to recite to yourself sometimes.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I think it does ultimately become an empowering story. But yeah, and I think it's, it's even, I don't know if the record is even necessarily meant to be like, this can happen to men too, but more just
for sure.
to say that it can happen to anybody, and
exactly.
that it's not necessarily about physical, a physical dysfunction.
I mean, I think it applies to both genders, and obviously I'm sure the messages you're getting, they're not just from guys saying it, they're from women or people non-binary saying, I've been in this relationship and I've realized that it's like that line, don't ever let anyone tell you deserve that I think a lot of people need to hear sometimes and can grow from if they recognize it.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you. I wanted to, before we dive really deeply into the album, I wanted to ask, first of all, if you remember, because I'm from a place called Birmingham in the UK, and I remember seeing you do a gig at a venue called the Oobleck in what must have been the Familiars tour. Do you have any memories of that show? You had Marika Hackman supporting you, and I remember there was
which is crazy to think of now.
Yeah, there was a hand dryer which was going off when she was performing, and I remember people could hear it in the crowd, and it was really awkward because you could hear the bathroom hand dryer while she's singing this delicate acoustic song.
Yeah, I remember all of that. It's funny, actually. Recently, I don't remember, the word oobleck came up.
Really?
I was talking to someone, and that word came up. I was like, I think I think I played a venue somewhere called Oobleck, and I
Yeah.
couldn't remember where it was, and now you're reminding me.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I remember I remember the hand dryer during those beautiful sets that Marika was doing.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, wow, what a time. That was almost 10 years ago, I
Yeah, it
guess.
must have been. It must have been. So there you go. I'm glad I brought it back. It was almost meant to be. A big shout out in chat to Little Rodeo Clown, who says, currently skipping work for this. Thank you for streaming it. It's my pleasure. And if you guys have any questions for Peter, I would be more than happy to ask them as well. We speak about Marika, you know, a beautiful artist and a beautiful voice. What music are you actually listening to at the moment? Are there any kind of real great artists you keep revisiting? I mean, I played the microphones before I spoke to you. So is there anything like that or anything new that you're listening to?
Yeah, I used to listen to the microphones a lot, and I haven't in a while. I don't, for no real reason other than I just haven't. Though I was listening to an interview with him about the album Mount Erie.
Yeah.
I think it was on that Life of the Record podcast, which was just interesting to think about that record, which I haven't in a long time, and hearing what was going into it at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, what have I been listening to lately? Yeah, there's a couple of things. I've been revisiting the last two, or really the most recent, the last two Jessica Pratt
Nice
albums, which I've kind of burned a hole in both her most recent one from a few years ago and the one before that.
Yeah.
But I just always come back to them. I feel like she's just like one of the best, you know, for lack of a better word, one of the best singer-songwriters today. And looking forward to her new one that's coming out soon.
For sure.
I've been listening to this. It's an instrumental record by an artist who goes by Blue Lake.
Okay, it rings a bell.
Yeah, it's the cover is, if it's passed through your periphery, you'd probably recognize it. It's completely white with just a blue shape on it.
Okay.
But it's a really beautiful record. He builds his own zithers and records this gorgeous music. It's very like immersive and kind of heavenly sounding. And
Absolutely.
I've just been continually reaching for that one. I've also been. I was my wife and I were watching 6 Feet Under recently. That show from like almost 20 years ago, and a song came on during a scene, and I was like, what is that? Because I've always been a huge fan of 90s trip hop and 90s electronica, and there's this tune that came on, and I had to Shazam it, and it was a group called the Dining Rooms.
Nice.
And I've been listening to them lately, just as kind of background music while I'm doing whatever, emails and whatnot.
Yeah. Do you think there's some music you listen to that people might be surprised hearing your own music? Because a lot of indie bands I interview, everyone sort of thinks, oh, well, you sound kind of tropical indie, so I bet you listen to Vampire Weekend. But then they spend most of their time listening to rap and hip hop and reggae. I mean, you're from New York, so I imagine you mentioned trip hop. Hip hop has probably been around.
Yeah, trip hop and hip hop. A lot of reggae, like a lot of old, like 70s, 60s, and 70s reggae and dub. That's been in the mix for a really long time for me. I don't really listen to any rock music as of the last, I don't know, pretty long time.
Yeah.
And not a whole lot of indie, but I do, but some.
Yeah.
But I would say like probably much more electronic music than people would expect.
Yeah.
But maybe they wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, you dabbled in Burst Apart with a little bit of electronics, I think.
Yeah, for sure. That record, we were kind of trying to make an electronic record, but with guitars as well. I think, like kind of trying to, for me, Radiohead has always been a kind of pinnacle of achievement and something aspiring to. And so at different phases in my music making, I've just had them in mind, and I think with Burst Apart, OK Computer was kind of making a return for me, which was a record I was obsessed with when I was growing up. And haven't listened to as much lately. But come back to it every so often, and yeah, and working on a record now that I would say is very like Kid A and Amnesiac
Is that
informed.
an Antlers record or a
Antlers
solo?
record,
An
yeah.
Antlers. So there you go.
Antlers,
Is that an
yeah.
exclusive?
It
Maybe.
might be. I feel like I've been kind of casually just being like, oh, I'm
Yeah, by
working
the
on a
way,
record.
guys, there is an album. Well, that's amazing. And Radiohead, I adore Radiohead. In fact, I've got it's obscure, but I've got to the side of me Atoms for Peace, which is one of Tom York's side
Oh man,
projects.
yep.
Yeah, so I love this album. And Mark, I think OK Computer was always my favorite when I was younger. I've come to love Amnesiac a little bit actually recently. I think there's some really underrated songs on there, like Spinning Plates, Life in a Glass House. There's just so much, and another great singer in falsetto, Tom York, obviously, to go along yourself.
I mean, definitely a singer I was always trying to emulate when I was learning how to sing, and just that approach of treating rock music like electronic music.
Yeah,
I guess would be the best way to put it. And not really subscribing to whatever norms there are in recording organic sounding music.
Yeah, absolutely. In the indie space, I can really recommend a band called The Last Dinner Party as well from the UK. They're starting to get a lot of buzz.
Cool! I've heard that name.
Yeah, they're quite Kate Bush, very kind of operatic, and I think indie needs to be supercharged. Ever since your neighbours, The Strokes, kind of kickstarted it in 2000s, I think it's slightly been waning in the last 5 years because people are trying to recapture that. But yeah, The Last Dinner Party are doing something pretty new and exciting.
Very cool.
Yeah, do you know a band called Wild Beasts? I know you follow them.
Yeah.
So
we played festivals with them back in the day, and I knew Hayden a little bit.
That's amazing. So they're literally one of my other favorite bands, and I think it is funny that maybe the Antlers and Wild Beasts have come together for me because, yeah, the two of you, like, I think that there was always cult followings, but Wild Beasts, in terms of the UK indie scene, I don't think there's ever been a band quite as exciting and unique as them. And you talk about falsetto singers again. Hayden's voice is just like,
it's so
phenomenal.
Unique.
So maybe I have no idea what a collaboration between you and Hayden would sound like, but I would love to hear it if ever.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah, I remember him being a really sweet guy, and I always loved watching them play. They were such incredible musicians, and yeah, there was always just like excitement around them when we were over there. It was cool to see.
Absolutely. Before we go on, I would love you to react to a meme that I made actually, and I shared it. I shared it in a popular Reddit page, Indie Head Circle Jerk, and it was a bit controversial. I hope you can see that on your screen.
That is controversial.
To see if a Discord goes. So there you go. Who's brave enough to admit Hospice by the Antlers greater than Neutral Milk?
Oh man, I would not want to see the comments on that.
Well, the thing is, the top comment is "I'll kill you," with 276 upvotes. But then I replied to that, "The semen stains the mountaintops." So people enjoyed that. It got 280 upvotes, so there was like a consensus. Little Rodeo Clown in chat was saying real, but I know I'm always like a staunch advocate for Hospice in that space because I think I'm sure you know the Neutral Milk Hotel album and the Airplane Over the Sea. It's a great album, but I think for me, Hospice, it's like the kind of the pinnacle of lo-fi.
Well, thank you. Well, first let me say that one, the band name The Antlers is named after a microphone song.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's why it's extra funny. I do know.
And two, my first tattoo. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, I can. Right yeah.
So this is a Neutral Milk Hotel tattoo.
So you're a big Neutral Milk Hotel fan as well?
Yeah. Again, I haven't listened to them, and it's probably been about 20 years now. But both of those, there would be no Hospice without either of those records. I was thoroughly obsessed with both of them, and they both meant a great deal to me. And even though I don't listen to either or haven't in a long time, they're definitely deeply baked in there.
Yeah.
So Hospice is definitely standing on the shoulders of giants. But it's also, it's one thing I would say about Hospice is that um, unlike those two records, I think Hospice is I don't know. I guess it has its own unique sound, but it's also paying homage to so many other artists.
Yeah.
I don't hear that when I hear Nutrimilk Hotel or the Microphones. I really hear that being the vision of people making something entirely their own. And I
Yeah.
know when I was making Hospice that there were, like Wake was really, to me, referential to a Godspeed You Black Emperor song.
I love that band. Yeah, I think Storm is
That one
amazing.
song
Yeah,
on
so,
the Skinny Fist that everyone
yeah.
loves. And the choruses of Bear were very, to me, referential to Belle and Sebastian,
Yeah.
and Two was referential to a Bright Eyes song, and um, what's Kettering was kind of referential to Anthony and the Johnsons.
Yeah.
Um, Sylvia was kind of, I don't know, maybe like Sigur Rós or
Yeah.
something. But there was My Bloody Valentine's in there. Like, I think for me, when I hear Hospice, it's a little bit like Spot the Reference.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and also like Nutrimilk Hotel is in there, and the Microphones are in there, and
Yeah.
Ockerville River is in there, and I think that I don't hear that when I listen to In the Airplane Over the Sea or The Glow Part 2.
Yeah.
I feel like those are just records that sound like nothing else.
It's amazing to hear you say all this. To be fair, I think it's kind of funny for me because I'm quite petty, to be honest, and I always have like a little joke with my chat where I'll say, "Oh, In the Airplane Over the Sea, I've listened to it and I've never quite connected to it." I'm like, but Hospice by the Antlers, that's a proper lo-fi listen to. But that kind of sense of rivalry, you probably get it as a musician. It's funny that the fans will pick these rivalries when, for you as the artist, it's just this great inspiration, and you would never have a bad word to say probably about either of the artists.
Oh, definitely
Yeah.
not. I mean, I've never met Phil, but I'm sure he's great. And
Yeah.
I met Jeff once, and he was incredibly sweet. And there's never been a sense of competition with. There's never been a sense of competition with inspiration with
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
that have inspired me. I'm only human, and I have felt competition with other artists, but in a completely superficial way.
Yeah.
It's not really.
Anyone you'd like to call out, start a rivalry with? You're quite deep into your career, it could.
No, I'm honestly. No, I really don't. I guess I've just been fortunate that I haven't really had dust-ups with other artists. I feel like
No.
I've been fortunate to meet a lot of the artists that I look up to, and have found them all to be really just very personable.
That's kind.
And
that's
there's assholes around for sure.
Oh, without a doubt.
But they're usually not people that usually those people are, you might be playing a festival or something somewhere, and it's a band you're not really familiar with, and someone in their group is carrying themselves with a kind of arrogance that can feel so silly to witness when you don't know their music and don't really know who they are, and it's sort of like,
it melts away.
Who is this guy being so rude to everybody?
Yeah.
That it can be just sort of baffling, but
that's really funny. Yeah,
there really hasn't been anyone where I've been like, wow, they were such a jerk. I can't believe it, and I loved their music so much, and it ruined it for me. I don't think that ever really happened.
We've got a really cool comment in chat again from Little Radio Clown, which is, I got into the Antlers because someone told me 2 is similar to Perfect Sonnet by Bright Eyes. I had no idea that was an intentional inspiration. We're building the Antlers lore out with this interview.
Oh boy. I don't know if it was intentional exactly. I kind of realized it after the fact. Um, and by then it was probably too late to do anything about it.
Yeah.
But that's funny that someone would be like, these melodies are the same, so you'd
Mm.
probably like it, rather than saying like, this is a ripoff.
I'll tell you what is interesting though is Godspeed You Black Emperor. I listen to Raise Your Skinny Fists all the time, especially when I'm on long journeys and I want an album that kind of warps time a bit. I always go to that.
Mhm.
And I've never drawn a parallel between Storm or any of those tracks and Wake before. So that's interesting where maybe to you, it's like if a video game developer is playing through his game, he probably sees like, oh, well, this is where I use this piece of code and that piece of code. But someone who's
Yeah.
not an expert looking at the finished product wouldn't have the eye to go, oh, well, that is from this inspiration and that's this. So yeah.
It could be. I mean, I think when you're making a record, you're so incredibly zoomed in on it that
Yeah.
you think that everything about it is obvious, and most of it's not.
Absolutely. I think Hospice, it does seem like the kind of album you could keep delving into and find something new about it every time. So I guess moving a bit more deeply into it now, the reaction when it first came out, what was that like for you? Because I think this is pre-social media, but I was watching an old interview you did with ABC News about the album, which to me, the idea that like a new band, like a lo-fi indie band, could just get that level of stardom to be on a mainstream news broadcaster, even now that would be huge. And back then there were no alternatives. So what was that flurry like immediately when the album came out for you?
Well, the ABC News, I remember that. That was actually on Burst Apart, but I think he.
Oh yeah, he went back.
As was the case with, a lot of interviews done on Burst Apart, people were still really fixated on Hospice.
Yeah.
So I ended up often like talking about Hospice, trying to redirect conversation
be like,
to
look,
the album, but
every night my teeth are falling out. Check this
people,
out.
but people just still had a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the response initially, there was this period of time before before we released the album where it was just being kind of passed around privately, and a handful of people who heard it got really excited about it, including a pretty serious interest from a big indie label. And at that time, it really seemed like our ship had come in, and like this kind of dream was about to come true. And the short version of that story is that we'd booked our own tour, and one of the shows was going to be, it was a US tour, and one of the shows was going to be bringing us through the town where this label was based. And so all the label people came out to see us play. This was like 2008.
Yeah.
And they were all really psyched on the record, and they all came out, and after seeing us play, they basically ghosted us for months.
Oh no. That's so industry of them.
We didn't know what to do. We really didn't have any experience in the industry. We had a friend of ours was kind of managing us, but and she was the one who had kind of passed it off to them in the first place. But in terms of chasing these people, getting things to move forward, we really didn't know what to do. And looking back at what our live show was like then, I think their impression was that these, as excited as they were about the record, they saw the live version of it and they thought these guys aren't ready. And it was really disheartening when that happened. But we thought that was going to be what launched us, and it just completely fell through. And so we decided that we were going to just do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And by that point, I had already kind of amassed a pretty large mailing list of just all the music blogs, which were the primary way that people found out about music back then, was just all these scattered blogs that fed into the hype machine. And I had developed like communication relationships with all of them over the years. I'd worked at a label and gotten to know how the process worked for pitching stuff, and just one by one had added these people to this list. So whenever I released something, I would send it out to them. And so I was like, I guess I'm just going to do the same thing that I've been doing for the last few years. And I had gotten a good amount of responses in the past for albums before Hospice and things like that. It had never translated to people coming to our shows or anything like that, but I was just sort of at a loss for what else to do, and I was like, I'm just gonna keep doing it. I'm gonna keep doing what I know how to do. And I guess there was just something different about Hospice because I think maybe those people heard that this was something different, and it started getting a lot of attention on these smaller blogs, and it was sort of just this critical mass of a lot of these blogs talking, and it getting passed around to kind of bigger and bigger people in that world.
Because Pitchfork were probably quite big at that time, right? I know they got hold of it.
They were still totally career makers, and I don't think we had any coverage from them at that point, and that felt like the holy grail at that point as well. Eventually, it did make its way to them eventually. I think they reviewed a track. I think they reviewed Bear as a track.
Yeah.
Which got us a fair amount more of attention, but it was really NPR that gave
amazing.
it a big boost up, where they just it was Bob Boylan and Robin Hilton who were hosting All Songs Considered at the time.
Is that Bob Boylan who launched NPR Tiny Desk as well?
Yeah,
the same. Wow.
The very same. They got their hands on the record and they were really excited about it, and they played it on their show, and they published an article saying it was, I don't remember if they said it was one of, or it was the best record of the year so far. Mm-hmm. It was early in the year. It was only March.
At this time,
You know, Merryweather Post Pavilion hadn't come out yet, so maybe it had.
So just to jump in there, because the fact that you're an Animal Collective fan again, that makes me so happy, because they're one of my other favorite bands. Did you know their lyric, 1,000 wasted Brooklyners are depressed? From the song...
what song is that?
That is Reverend Green. So
I love that. So that's actually probably my favorite song of theirs.
Well, there you go. So do you as a New Yorker, does that lyric mean a lot to you? Because I always listen to that lyric and I think about the Brooklyn indie scene and Antlers and the Strokes, and it's such a vivid kind of song and lyric.
What's the lyric again?
1,000 wasted Brooklyners are depressed. I think it's like for one moment to the next. 1,000 wasted Brooklyners are depressed.
That resonates for sure. At least back in the day. I mean, this Brooklynite was for sure. Back in 2008.
Have you met Animal Collective?
No, I don't think I ever have, actually. I don't think we ever crossed paths. I saw them at a really tiny show back in like 2005. Yeah, 2005, playing a little tiny college near where I was going to school at the time, with probably like, I don't know, 20 people. I think they were touring on Sung Tongs. They were about to put out Feels, and so they were playing some songs from Feels, and Ariel Pink was opening. It's very weird.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, Feels is one of my favorite albums of all time. Is Feels your favorite by them, or do you think Merryweather is?
Yeah, Sung Tongs or Feels. Yeah. I like different favorites for different times.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. With Animal Collective, it's like a different band each album, and then you get to like Centipede Hurts, and you're like, oh, okay, this is getting kind of heavy now. You can go back to, I think, like Dance Manatee, which is just noise, and they push those.
Or like campfire songs, I mean, there's such a wealth of.
Hearing you talk about campfire songs is so surreal, because your solo album is kind of alongside campfire songs for me in this playlist of songs that I listen to when I'm on long coach journeys. So it's so funny that there is actually a parallel, at least you're aware of that, because I thought Campfire Songs is such an obscure album, maybe more in this country because not as many people know Animal Collective, but that's cool.
I think it is a bit of a like lost record here as well. But I don't know, actually. I mean, not among the heads, but I think like a lot of people got on the ride at Merryweather, so who knows how aware they are of all the smaller releases before that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so where was I? I was saying that, it started gaining momentum, and NPR really boosted it. And then from there, we started getting a lot of interest from labels and publicists, and people started coming to our shows, and it just sort of took off on its own momentum from there. But it was, it was only it was months before that we were playing Empty Rooms to nobody, and it just seemed like I don't know if this is really going to go anywhere.
Yeah. And then it all took off. I want to give a big shout out to Lucas in chat who's in now. Hey Lucas, and you weren't here for it, Lucas, but you will absolutely love Peter Silberman here has confirmed he is a very big Neutral Milk Hotel fan. So no, I will. I mean, you say the band are very influential for you, right, Peter? Because me and Lucas talk about them a lot on stream, and I always say, "Oh, Hospice is better than In the Airplane Over the Sea." Could you
Apples and oranges?
Apple and Oranges. So, yeah, if I was to ask you which you thought was the better album out of Hospice and In the Airplane Over the Sea, could you even begin to answer that question? I guess it's hard with your own music, maybe.
I'd rather listen to In the Airplane Over the Sea, but
well, yeah, understandable. One's one's autobiographical for you, so yeah. But yeah, he's got a Neutral Milk Hotel tattoo, Lucas. So I need to listen to the album more. I did enjoy it, but I think it's like I see that album held in a light, and I'm like, I'd love it if Hospice by Antlers was always alongside it, because it often is. But in that debate of like, when Pitchfork or Anthony Fantano or whoever is talking about those, perfect albums, I'm like, that's Hospice could be in that space next to
thanks.
Like that. Anytime. So obviously everything's been blowing up with the album, and then you went, was it going from Empty Rooms to suddenly sellouts around America quite quickly, or did it take a bit of word of mouth time for things to
took several months, and the shows were selling out, but they were small shows, but then they started getting bigger, and then we started working with people who kind of knew how to keep that momentum growing.
Yeah.
And it was just really up to us to say yes to what was happening.
Absolutely. Running through some of the tracks on the album, conveniently, Alice has asked a question, which refers to Kettering. Obviously, well, second if you include Prologue, but pretty much first track on the album. She says, can you ask Peter how he got the vocals in Kettering to sound the way they do? Yeah, I guess they're so kind of delicate, almost like you're whispering, but they feel so prominent as well. And you produced it pretty much all yourself, didn't you? So was there a technique there?
Yeah, whatever technique was just sort of experimentation. My recording setup was incredibly simple. I had I don't know. This is like sort of like entry level recording gear. At least it was when I was making the record. Something called an M-Box. It was a DigiDesign made this. It was like one of the first kind of like consumer level small recording interfaces. It was like 2 channels. It was just this like little tower.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can. I'm trying to get my hands in the right position.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's very visible. I can see what the display looks like. You're crystal clear.
Yeah. It's just 2 knobs and hooks up to your computer, and mine was falling apart for some reason. I remember that I had to kind of like hold it together to keep like all the guts from spilling out, and that's what Burst Apart was written about, obviously.
That's the concept for this console.
My broken recording interface. I had one microphone, the same basic mic that you see in any little venue, just a Shure SM58. And I recorded all the vocals within a couple of days. And I think I just sang very close to the mic and very quietly and just cranked up the gain on it.
Yeah.
And then I think as far as the kind of creepy haunted tone of it, that was really a matter of EQing it in a way that was kind of like a bandpass EQ. So it's just the kind of center frequencies coming through and some amount of just like processing and reverb on it to make it, I guess, sound like it was kind of like a
we have
someone singing in a cave, or like a Phantom of the Opera person like living underground kind of sound.
But I think as an album, I've never heard anything that quite feels as cohesive even within concept albums? And is that because you were just recording these songs very close together, back to back? Because the themes, the sound, there's just so much continuity, and I think it's amazing that you were able to stick so clearly to the vision for the album, and it doesn't feel like any single song is in the wrong place or any single song breaks that world that you've built during it.
Thanks. Well, I was working on the record over the course of about a year and a half, I think. I recorded the vocals very close together, I think because I just, at the time, I really didn't enjoy recording vocals, and I wasn't a very strong singer, and I just wanted to get them over with. And so,
Yeah.
and I think I had a very narrow window of time. I think I recorded them at my parents' house. Like they were like away for the weekend, and I went up to like house sit for them, and I recorded the vocals in a couple of days.
Yeah.
Because the apartment I was living in was a very it was a very unprivate space, and it could be very loud. I lived with two DJs. This was in like the era of indie sleaze.
I read this anecdote where they were coming back like really late at night from shows, so you were all kind of, I think you used the phrase like ships at night. You wouldn't see each other, you'd just be passing through.
Totally. Yeah, they were like indie sleaze DJs, and this was like 2007, 2008. There would be this narrow window of time where they would be out for the night, and I could record, and then they'd come back. But it was just easier for me to record the vocals in a place where there was no other people, just for privacy's sake.
Yeah.
But the rest of the record I really labored over for like a year and a half, and I had this pretty clear vision about it from the beginning. I think once I landed on the metaphor, I just kind of had an idea of the aesthetic, and I wanted everything to sound damaged, and so there were certain techniques that I employed with it that are throughout the record. I actually have a piece of it here. Hold on.
Yeah, a piece of Antlers history. What's going on? What's up as well, Ellie and Poppy in chat? Hello. Oh wow, it's a tape.
Yeah, it's a little tape recorder.
It's amazing.
It's the same one I used on the record, and I use it every once in a while on things. And it's got this. Yeah, you can record straight into it, or you can. Yeah, or you can send something into it. You could like do a line into it,
so cool.
Play it out of the speaker, and it kind of just distorts everything in a way that kind of compresses it and makes it sound damaged.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of points on the record that I was employing that, where I would record things in the computer, then I would send them out to this tape recorder. I would put the mic in front of the speaker and record that back into the computer, and just do that over and over and over again until it just sounded sickly, basically.
Fits with the vibe. That's incredible. I think Sylvia on the album, it always stands out. It's quite like a sonic kind of high point. It's quite, I guess you could say, catchy. 4 songs on the album. Sylvia, I think, is also the name within the context of the album you give to your partner. Is that a Sylvia Plath reference? Because I mean, you have the image of get your head out the oven, and that was why you fell upon the name.
Yeah, well, it's a Sylvia Plath reference. It's also a reference to a novel by the writer Leonard Michaels.
Yeah.
Called Sylvia.
Okay.
Which was based on his relationship with a disturbed person.
Yeah.
Who he named Sylvia. I don't know if her real name is Sylvia, but I kind of, all these things kind of coalesced at the same time, and that just felt to me like that was the right name.
Yeah, and it works so well. I think it works so well. There's a sound in that's throughout the album. I think it's really prominent, especially in Atrophy. I almost describe it as an oscillation, and I've never heard anything like that in an album again. It's almost like uncomfortable but hypnotic in a sense. Do you know this noise, and how is it you made it? It feels like
so. It's like the end of Atrophy, where it's sort of it's like a very abrasive kind. Yeah. So yeah, that was definitely like a My Bloody Valentine inspired
amazing
sound.
Yeah.
I think the way I made that was it was actually just a Boss tremolo pedal. That I was just running at a high speed, and I don't remember what that sound was originally that I was feeding through it. But it was probably going through it multiple times. It was
Yeah.
probably a sound that I had recorded that was probably a long drone that I
Mm.
then sent out of it and then back into the
Yeah.
pedal a
It,
few
it, it,
times
it, it
and EQ'd
almost
it in such a way that it would be like kind of abrasive.
Yeah, it almost feels or sounds like a piece of medical equipment. I think that's why it's
Yeah,
it's so good. Either that or like helicopter blades, which I think is a motif that comes
yeah,
up again with the image of Wake, because you think of like an air ambulance, lifting a patient away, or then the image in that song. So
yeah.
that was like maybe helicopters were on your mind when you were.
I think they were. Yeah, it does sound like there's a word for that sort of like choppy air sound that helicopters make, but I don't know what it is
Yeah,
offhand.
chat are very
Um,
excited. My Bloody Valentine have been mentioned as well. We've got some big My Bloody Valentine fans on stream.
I feel like people got crazy about My Bloody Valentine in the last few years. I don't know
Oh
what
yeah, the
happened.
kids are into
I love
them.
it.
90s resurgence.
It's great.
Lucas says as well, what does he think of the microphone's music having a similar feeling? Obviously, the concepts are very different, but they have similarities. I mean, yeah, we touched on it. The Antlers name comes from a microphone song, so safe to say that Peter's a big microphones fan.
Yeah, I mean, especially just his recording techniques and the way that his records really didn't sound like anybody else's at the time or since maybe. It it made it feel like there weren't any rules to recording.
Yeah,
Um, and that you could do it any way that you wanted, and that it was a bit more of like sound as art.
yeah, absolutely. There you go. Pika says in chat, maybe it's because Billie Eilish is a fan of My Bloody Valentine, so she might have talked about them and sort of
Oh, that's
got a
cool. I
hook
didn't
on it.
know that.
There you go. There you go.
Nice.
Going back to Hospice, there are some amazing lyrics on the album. I think one of the ones that is funny because I think when you're in a relationship that's kind of traumatic, sometimes humor can be a coping mechanism. And
Hmm.
the line "and all the while I know we're fucked and not being unfucked soon." It feels it's almost like gallows humor that does come into it. Was that a lyric that came to you very like directly and vividly? You're like, yeah, I want to include that in the song, or was it more spontaneous?
That's a great question. I'm trying to remember. Um, it's a little hard to remember where certain turns of phrase came from.
Mm.
Because sometimes when I hear the record, I will think to myself like, I can't believe I left that in there. Um, but I think there was such a for me there was such a kind of feeling of empowerment in not censoring myself
Yeah,
in that experience after the fact, an experience that had been very kind of like self-censoring and kind of walking on eggshells in terms of expressing myself, that I think when making this record, part of the appeal to me was that I could really say anything I wanted and not second guess too much,
yeah,
for better or worse.
yeah.
That line in particular, I don't know where it came from. I'm glad that I kept it in there.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something I used to say. I think I've always liked to kind of play around with language and make up tenses of words and things like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's in
That's how
there.
it goes. It's in there. Rihavi, far away. Rihavi just wants to know if you like mangoes. He's like, I have a question for you. I'm like, oh, what's it going to
I
be?
do like mangoes. Yeah,
There you go.
I love mango.
They're a great fruit. They're a great fruit. Moving through Hospice chronologically, when you get to 13, you get, I think, the only voice in the record, as far as I'm aware, that isn't yours. A
Hmm.
female voice that comes in at the end. And I think the alternate title for the track is Sylvia Speaks.
Hmm.
Who is that voice, and what's the significance of suddenly the narrator's, I guess, story being punctuated by someone else?
Yeah, so that voice is Sharon Van Etten, actually.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, she and I had become friends like about well, I guess that was because I that was in 2008 that I made the record and that I was recording it, and I think that was the same year that we met. And when we met, I was already like pretty deep into working on this record, um, and I had this piece of a song that was sung from a different perspective, or at least I wanted it to be sung from a different
Mm.
perspective. But I didn't really know many musicians at all. Those first few years living in New York, and I think Sharon was probably the first female singer that I met in New York. And we just, we became friends pretty quickly, and I would go to see her play a bunch, and she would come to our shows, and I think just hearing her voice at that time, and the music she was making at the time was very sparse. It was really just like her and an acoustic guitar, and it was like home recorded and very haunting.
Yeah.
Which was a big quality that drew me to her music in the first place. Was it had this sadness to it, but there was this almost like grouper like quality to it.
Definitely.
And I think I was listening to grouper a lot while making this record as well, and I think it just dawned on me, like, I think Sharon is kind of the missing piece here. And so she came over one day and she sang this part that I had in mind, and then she came up with this harmony on top of it, and she sings in another part on the record too. It's at the end of 2. Those kinds of like dissonant voices, those dissonant oohs that are the sort of outro of the track. That's her as well.
It is interesting. I'm not even sure if Genius has her feature down. I assume they do, but I think I was trying to look and I couldn't see who it was. Hence why. Yeah,
that's her on 13, end of 2. She's on Shiva too, actually. She sings the oohs on that song.
Oh.
And she sings on a couple of songs from an EP that I did before Hospice. Or I think I made the EP during Hospice.
Is this like, it's a demo EP that's got some tracks from Hospice in early states? Or is this a completely unrelated one, like after Uprooted and Attica?
It's after Uprooted. It's not exactly demos. It's called New York Hospitals.
Yeah, I've listened to it. I know it.
So it's got the Magnetic Fields cover, Yola Tango cover, and then a song called Sylvia, an Introduction.
Yes, that's what I've heard.
Which is, it's sort of that melody that was in Bear and Epilogue was just one that I'd written so many verses for it, and I didn't really want to get rid of any of them. They all felt relevant to the story, and I think the chorus of that song is also the same melody as 13. So I'd kind of overwritten and wanted to kind of find a home for those words, and so she didn't sing on Sylvia an Introduction, but she sang on the 2 covers that are on that EP as well. I think it was all in the course of like one day. I was just like, all right, you're here, let's do this.
Whip it out, go through the sessions. Is it somewhere on Bandcamp? I don't know where I listened to it. I don't think it's on Spotify. New York Hospitals.
I think it's on Bandcamp. It should be on Spotify. It's just it's my own like mismanagement of my catalog.
You're an artist. You can't expect you to do.
I get messages sometimes that's like Hospice isn't on the like Instagram in Brazil, and I'm like, all right, I'll work on.
I'll be on that. I think one really great thing about this album as well, and it's a mark that I always go to a great album for. Interesting to know that you're a big Radiohead fan leading into this question, but the transitions between songs, I always think about Airbag into Paranoid Android. I think that when you have masterpiece albums, I think you have to start thinking about the transitions between the albums. And there's so many really great ones on Hospice. Prologue into Kettering. There's a couple towards the end as well. Were you quite mindful of how the tracks were mixing into each other, not just the individual sound?
I think that, first of all, it's really fun to make those transitions. Like sometimes writing the song and recording the song is like the work part of it, and then the transitions is where you get to really have fun and experiment. I'm sure Radiohead records were influential in that regard. I'm thinking about like songs on Kid A and Amnesiac that would sort of tack on just a totally
Morning Bell to Kid A. Oh no, so Morning Bell to Idiotek. That's the really nice.
Yep. yeah, where just like another piece of something else is tacked on and maybe like abruptly cuts out before the next thing. I love those moments on records.
Good.
They help the entire thing feel seamless, and
Yeah.
they're things that you don't always notice the first few times you listen to it, and it's like you're finding songs in between the songs.
Yes. I love that phrase, but I always notice them, and I think it's probably because I've worked in radio, so it's like, if you're a DJ, probably the same. It's about transitions between the songs, but a lot of bands just never think about it, and you have an LP which is like, oh well, it's 11 songs, and they don't.
Right.
And even if it's not a concept album, I think you can still have a bit of continuity there to just make it feel like a more polished and proper LP experience.
I just think it depends on what your recording process is like too. I don't know that everybody thinks of recording a record as like a secret little art project, or they don't necessarily think of it like painting. But for me, that's so much of the fun. It's why I love making records. Is you have this huge canvas and you can really do whatever you want with it. And if you need a radio version, then you chop that part off and you've got another version of it.
It's right there. It's right there. I remember I actually forgot to ask this, but it was tacked onto the 13 question with Sylvia's voice coming in. Do you ever think about what Hospice would sound like if it was the same album written by your ex, from her perspective?
I've never been asked that question before. Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth saying that the story in this album is my truth, and it's not necessarily the objective truth of the situation. And I think the person it was written about would have a different interpretation of what went on. And even I have a different interpretation of it all these years later, just having better perspective on myself at that age. This record, it's I think considered a very sad album, but to me, when I hear it, it's such an angry record. It's so full of anger.
I understand that.
And anger can definitely color your interpretation of things, and it can color your idea of justice. To me, a lot of this record was, when I made it, was about finding vindication and justice for feeling like at the time feeling mistreated. And it was revenge, which is fucked up, but it really was. And it was, that's not an aspect of it that I'm particularly proud of, but I can say it with honesty and sort of own it.
It's part of grieving and healing, I think, because I was so angry. I remember, especially some of the fallout. I've been so angry, and I know now that I can kind of speak with a bit more emotional maturity, which people are really appreciating from you in chat, because at that time I kind of got that anger out, and rather than bottling it up, I think maybe it's a cathartic thing. I don't know if you.
It's catharsis, and I think that that doesn't necessarily absolve me or anyone of what they do with that anger.
Yeah, for sure.
But it does explain it a little bit. I think I wouldn't speak for this person. I don't know them anymore. But
so you don't speak, or you're not in touch. I was going to ask that, but you haven't spoken since the album.
No, we haven't spoken since. But if I was to summarize, if I was just to take a guess at what their version of this record would be, it would be something along the lines of, I had no idea.
That's interesting. And I think it is funny. You talk about perspectives. You always want to say there's two sides to things, but I think also in relationships, like with my experience, if I was with my ex and with a friend and they saw something happen, like in hindsight afterwards, everyone has their perspective on it. But if it's something like, oh, you had an argument and then they shoved you, it's like you have the objective truth there, and then you have both people's interpretation of it. And I think it's important not to lose sight of the objective truth, especially if it's a situation where you're like, I did deserve better. You know, I didn't deserve that situation still.
I completely agree, and I don't mean to both sides it. I think that you have to choose what your objective truth is, and
Yes.
you can't find a way to, as much as I'm someone who tries to find empathy for everybody and to try to understand where other people are coming from, even if they've hurt me, or have been unreasonable or done something really fucked up. I
Yeah.
do think that there are boundaries, and I think I should probably amend what I said about their perspective being I had no idea, and more that it wouldn't be totally oblivious to
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
stuff, but it would maybe be I had I don't know. I guess it's unrealistic to expect people to see themselves to that degree, especially when they're behaving dysfunctionally, and that's a really hard thing to accept sometimes.
That's so true.
Is when people are mistreating you or acting insane.
Yeah, if
To expect them-
if they're not well themselves, to see that it's
yeah,
hard.
and to expect them to see what you see.
Yeah.
It's frustrating because it can feel really obvious being on the receiving end of it, but I think to the other person, it's a lot easier to not see how you are.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes being shown that, and sometimes it takes something nuclear, like, I don't know, like this record,
Yeah.
not to defend
nuclear.
it, but I think
I
think
get that.
the person it was about saw where I was coming from when they heard it. I think it was devastating for them.
Yeah.
But I think at that point in my life, that felt like the only way I could actually communicate what I had been trying to communicate for a long time.
Yeah.
And didn't really know how.
I think that's kind of amazing, actually. We have maybe opened Pandora's box a bit by mentioning New York hospitals, because Lucas in chat said 3 New York hospitals. Then we've got a first-time chat from Juge Vanny saying, and Cold War as well, since we're at it. And Little Rodeo Clown says February tape. Are these all the deep cuts?
Yeah, those are all from kind of the same time. Yeah, they've been neglected. They deserve their day in the sun.
They will. One day we'll do the 20th anniversary or the 15th anniversary and do like the big box set with all the deep cuts and remixes.
Yeah, totally.
The image of femur, it comes up a lot through the album. That's really interesting. So why was it a femur that you zeroed in on, the bone, right, as the type of cancer that you almost wanted to be referencing?
Because the cancer being referenced is osteosarcoma.
Yeah.
So it's a personal reference.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's some beautiful lyrics linked to it, and yeah, that feels really poignant. Then, when we get towards Wake, I think it feels like almost the whole journey of the album is summarized, and it's such a beautiful song. And I still listen to that track now in isolation as almost like an emotional reset button, because I think when you get to the end and it crescendos, it's very uplifting. But a few lyrics on that. Someone has to sweep the floor, pick up their dirty clothes. That job's not mine. I think I really relate to that, and I don't know if you would identify with this experience or anyone in chat might at all. But I remember when I broke up with my ex, actually, and she had struggled with a lot of things. I found that there was like kind of trash that had been like hidden in my room, and I went through the process. It was like empty wrappers of things, because we'd lived in this space in lockdown, and I had to kind of go through and clean it all. And I think that is part of relationships. You can sometimes become like a caregiver, even if the person doesn't need it physically. It might be an emotional thing, and I was interested to see if you identified with that experience at all.
Yeah, I think any relationship dynamics develop, and it's, in the record it is it's exaggerated
Mm.
to have me kind of fulfilling this role as like a nurse or a caregiver. But I don't think that's an unnatural thing, and it's not always an unhealthy thing that um, in a partnership that one person is, ends up kind of taking care of certain things that
Yeah.
the other person is maybe just less able to. Um, in I think in a healthy, loving relationship, that can be kind of a gift, and it can be,
Yeah.
if you've ever heard of love languages, it can be like acts of service.
Yeah.
But I guess that can shift into something darker when there is a sort of a very intense imbalance and expectation that one person is sort of the custodian and the
Yeah.
other person is helpless. That's
Yeah.
learned helplessness too.
Absolutely.
Is you kind of you can reinforce a dynamic of uh, I will take care of that so you don't have to, and then
Yeah.
that codependency and all of that
Yeah.
arises.
And
But
you.
there's no, unfortunately, there are no real like, here's a rule of something that should never happen in a relationship
Oh
with
yeah. You've
that
got to
sort of
find
thing.
the boundary.
Yeah.
For each other. And you have another line. I'm sleeping now. I'm sleeping next to mousetraps in a bed of all our clothes, and I hope that you won't come home. So I always interpreted this as it's like after the breakup, and you're in the room and you're almost hoping they don't come back because you're scared of what might happen if they do after the breakup, after you've made that decision. Is that a correct reading, or is it a bit different for you?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think after some types of breakups, um, the feelings can be very confusing and mixed
Yeah.
and contradictory, where you might be missing the person but just praying you don't run into them.
Yeah.
Um, or you're, you know, incredibly relieved to be out of this relationship, but you still feel this loneliness and missing the
Yeah.
companionship.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think in that song it's speaking from the moment of the breakup being very, very recent, but you are kind of, like one person has left and one other person is
Still there.
still there. And for me, it brings me back to a moment in time of exactly that, and being in kind of the remnants, ruins of life, a
Mm.
shared life that just ended, and being really young too, and
Yeah.
being in a place where I, was basically like, what do I do now? Like
Exactly.
I've been so entangled with this person, and
Mm.
I'm still learning how to be an adult. How do I like get out of
Exactly.
here?
Yeah.
Um,
It,
yeah.
and it's amazing because it's like I remember to be honest, to be very candid, like I think it was the night, literally the first night after my relationship ended, I actually barricaded my door, and it was so like irrational, but it just felt like it's that kind of sense in your head, like that extra security, and it's so weird then reflecting on that because obviously you miss
Mm,
that person, but you're also like feeling like paranoia and fear, and then you might see them on the street. So yeah, I think I
yeah.
really related to that lyric on such a personal level. So it's why for the whole of hospice, especially, like it helped me a lot to have that validated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really validating to hear myself as well.
Yeah.
It makes me think of a feeling I used to have, and I wonder if anyone else relates to this. It's kind of a similar thing, but it's I remember like walking around my old neighborhood and simultaneously holding the feeling of God, I hope I don't run into this person,
Yeah.
but then some kind of twisted part of me being like, I hope I run into them so I can have this
Moment.
kind of intensely fucked up feeling.
Yeah.
Not even a like, let me like show off my good new life. It's more like I want to like I'm feeling weird and unsettled, and I want to run into them so that I can feel that more intensely. And
Yeah.
it's a weirdly addictive
I
feeling.
get what you mean. Like the triumph, kind of like, yeah, I got through it, I got out, and it's yeah, I think it can come with a great sense of empowerment, and you feel suddenly invincible. I think having felt very vulnerable for a long time when you leave a relationship like that.
Mm.
Is the lyric "Spring and Thompson on the 1st of May is horrible" about that, or is that slightly aside?
Um, And that's just about the neighborhood I was
Yeah,
living in, which was this was Soho in New York,
nice.
um, and it was it was a place that in the springtime during the day was basically like a shopping mall. It was just so crowded.
Yeah,
It was horrible walking around there. And it's a really beautiful old neighborhood, like kind
yeah.
of classic New York, but just so overrun with tourists that it was like kind of hell to be there.
I can imagine. I don't imagine it's got any better as well in the past
Oh,
however many years. Probably even worse. But yeah, I think it's funny because Lucas actually asked in chat, or he said, "Oh, Enemy calls this the saddest album ever written." But then I think when you get to the end of Wake and you start really hearing those like, "Don't be scared to speak. Don't speak with someone's tooth. Don't bargain when you're weak, and don't take that sharp abuse." I find it such an uplifting album, and I think looking at where you're at now and then hearing an album like Green to Gold, I think Hospice, it can actually be quite a kind of. There are definitely parts of it that are traumatic, but it feels quite uplifting in a way because if you were still in that relationship now, however long on, then it would be like the depressing.
It'd be pretty sad,
And
yeah.
I think the sad thing is, I know some people who are in relationships like that who don't get out. And that's
Yeah.
why this is actually a triumphant story. Do you think it's a sad album? Do you reflect on it as that, or maybe something more of like, well, that was the chapter, and now I'm in a much better place with a wife.
Um, I think it's a sad album, but it's not only a sad album.
Yeah,
Like you're saying, I think there is triumph in it, or there's empowerment in it, um, which was a big part of the purpose of me writing it, was to find that empowerment for myself.
yeah,
Because I wasn't particularly happy for the years that that followed it.
no,
But they were years where I was trying to establish a new life and to find happiness, and I needed something to make me feel like I had triumphed, even if I hadn't yet.
yes,
Part of the triumph was just getting out, even if what was on the other side of it was scary and lonely.
mm,
Um, but like I said earlier, I think it's also a really angry record,
yeah,
um, and it's also a scary record. I think
I
there's
agree.
the kind of haunted quality to it. I find creepy, and I think that that speaks to the kind of trauma
Yeah,
aspect of the album of being, and that sort of where the record ends is epilogue is a sad song, but it's like a haunted song, and
yeah,
it follows the feeling of triumph, and
yeah.
it's this feeling of like it's almost like everybody patting you on the back and saying, "We're so glad you got out of this. We're just so happy for you, and like everything's going to be better now." And you're like, "Yeah, I am too. I really
Yeah,
agree." And behind closed doors, you're still suffering from this thing
honestly,
that stays with you for the rest of your
yeah.
life.
I mean,
Um,
your face is up against mine, and I'm too terrified to speak. Again, I think that says more than anyone ever could about how it feels, just internally to heal, even when you've
mhm.
like externally. But I mean, I haven't actually brought it in. Wake obviously is all about letting people in. Like, how important were your friends through it, and are you I guess grateful to them in a sense? Because I know for me, my friends, like my really close friends, helped me so much in that time, and I have like they really almost will at times I think almost mirror how you feel, your close friends, because they'll see the impact on you and they'll be supporting you all the way through that kind of process.
um, yeah, I mean that experience helped me really value my friends because I lost all of them during that time.
Yeah,
And when I came out of that relationship, I had to try to get them all back.
yeah,
So when it ended, there wasn't really anybody there being like, we're so happy for you. We're so
yeah.
glad to have you back. It was all right. Now it's time for the apology tour. Um,
I relate to that. There's a few people I had
um,
to message. I think
there,
luckily not a few, but yeah,
well, that's good. I mean, I think during that time, a lot of people kind of gave up trying to talk to me or trying to help me get out of it, because they just felt like I was brainwashed and I was in too deep.
Yeah.
And yeah, which I think that contributed to the kind of the fear of getting out of that situation is, up until that point with that partner, I had felt very alone, but I at least had this one person. And I knew
Yeah.
that if I actually let this relationship end, I would really, I had my family and my family stuck with me. But as far as
Sure.
friends, I was pretty much alone, and recognizing that once that ended, it was going to be a long climb back to reclaim
Yeah.
my reputation with these people and for them
Yeah.
to trust me.
Yeah.
And some friends never came back, but the ones
Yeah.
that mattered did.
Yeah.
And I've never taken that for granted since. At least I've tried not to.
Yeah. That's beautiful to hear.
But it's you hope that the people who know you best won't abandon you if things get really hairy, but we were all really young. I was like 20, and
Yeah.
that's a lot to expect of people who are still figuring themselves out, and especially at a time where friendships, people going off to university and going their separate ways, it's sort of the natural course of events for friendships to dissolve. And so
Yeah.
if there's a stressor like that, like somebody being consumed into a relationship that is turning them into another person,
Yeah.
it's a lot to expect people to stick around for that, even your
Oh yeah. You put them through
oldest
it. But they understand.
so yeah, you gotta recognize that the people who know you best are usually looking out for you.
Absolutely.
And to value them, because it's not a given that they'll stick around.
Absolutely. And it's just nice, like, not being in a relationship, I bet now, where you don't feel like if your partner maybe has a problem with a friend or loses a like for a friend, it becomes kind of your relationship being soured as well if you're spending a lot of time together, is what I found, at least.
For sure.
Yeah, big shout out to Pyro. Says I'm so gonna watch the whole stream later. Love you, the Antlers. And yeah, so this whole interview will be rewatchable where you are right now, twitch.tv/themcenter, and I'll probably clip it and put it on YouTube as well, because I've really enjoyed it. So epilogue, I think you've already touched on it, but the instrumental beat switch in that track and that specific sound towards the end, it almost feels like a lullaby to me, I think, reflecting on it. But it's such a different sound to the rest of the album. That was, I'm guessing, a big artistic decision for you to have that change at the end.
Yeah, I think that was I believe that was guitar that was, at some point, it was fed through this tape recorder.
That's the magic box. It's
the
amazing
magic
you still
box
have
of that
it.
record, for sure.
The hospice box.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying. I might have had that little snippet of audio as like a separate thing that I had recorded, and had just felt like that was the right way for this to end. Yeah, I'm trying to remember like what the decision was there. Yeah, because the song sort of doesn't end; it gets cut off.
Yeah.
And interrupted by this sort of outro arpeggio. Yeah, but I think it's a record that is about volatile emotions.
Yeah.
And the experience of trauma, which is about things returning to you and emotions coming up in unexpected doses, and memories coming up, and nightmares and dreams that kind of contain the real feelings about your life. And so I think that sort of volatility is probably what I was trying to represent there.
Absolutely. We've got a beautiful question from Little Rodeo Clown as well. He says, how did you have so much maturity and forethought in regards to your own boundaries and how many personal details you were willing to reveal in early interviews about hospice, and do you have any advice for artists trying to protect themselves while making similarly very revealing work?
Okay, so the first part of that question, as far as how did I have perspective on myself at that age, which was to some degree flawed perspective, I would say, looking back on it now. But as far as my understanding of what was happening, I had a very good therapist.
Yeah, therapy is great. Actually, that is a great. Definitely do therapy, guys.
And I would credit that experience of therapy as waking me up to what was going on in my life, and giving me the kind of strength to pull myself out of it. So I guess that would be my answer to that. It was also based on conversations I was having with my family at the time. As far as the additional parts of your question are a little more complicated. A lot of my decision to include very personal details in the album was motivated by anger and revenge. I think that, and I'm not particularly proud of that, but that's the way that it worked out. I think that the way that my brain works is that I'm noticing things all the time. And I think a lot of people who are creative in some way or writers are noticing details and kind of jotting them down internally or externally. And the brain is always working on writing a story.
Yeah.
And during that period of time, I was noticing a lot of details and I was filing them away. But never planning to do anything with them.
Yeah.
But maybe on some subconscious level, I was storing them as ammunition. And when it came time to write this, when I decided that I wanted to write this story and that I thought it would be empowering for me, or it would be healing for me, I felt like I already had the raw material there. I had already identified the kind of the themes, but also the specific details that seemed to hold some gravitas. I had already identified the metaphors, and I think sometimes details appear to you in a life experience where you're like, this almost seems like a movie, or this seems like the way it would be written in a story. It's almost too obvious to me. And the decision to include those things that were very personal, things that were inside references that really only the other person would understand, was part of what I thought was the power of the record, not to other people, but to this person. The record was really, it was a sort of last-ditch effort to make this person understand what I felt like had happened. And it felt like using our kind of internal language was the way to really drive it home. Now, that's not necessarily something that I would endorse for somebody else who's making a record. I think it's tricky because I think the record has had a net positive effect. Because of how many people it's reached and how many people it's spoken to. But I think the effect that it had on the person it was about was cruel. And even if it was a matter of kind of balancing the scales, it doesn't really align with my my general philosophy of taking the high road,
Mm.
even when it would be justified to exact
Yeah.
revenge on somebody. I think generally it's just ethically cleaner to take the high
Yeah.
road, and you'll end up feeling better about yourself, not
Mm.
stooping to somebody's love to a lower level.
Yeah.
But I think, as a general rule, I think it's hard to imagine that something you write, if you don't presently have an audience, it's hard to imagine that something you write could matter and could take on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, important to prepare for that possibility with anything you write, even if you have no audience whatsoever. And I think you need to treat the subject matter like that. And whenever possible, really consider trust and consent.
Yes.
Personal details. And if you're going to transform them or sublimate them or kind of create a metaphor, you better make sure that it's not that you're essentially not doxing somebody.
Oh, yeah, don't dox.
Like not doxing them to their family.
Well, it would be scarier now, almost, because of how things have evolved. Like hospice back then, at least I think before social media and people talking, and now everything is like, I imagine if a record like that came out now and was as popular, a lot of people on the internet would go, we want to find who that person is and find out where they work, and that's what the world has almost become.
Yeah, it's true. I'm sure that would have happened with hospice if it was released now, and I pray it doesn't happen, because that person deserves privacy.
Oh yeah, I don't think I want to do it now. But it speaks volumes, I think, of how kind of a person. I mean, obviously, I don't know you personally, but it seems the fact you're thinking, even in those terms, about someone who obviously hurt you, it's a very high grace to have that kindness for everyone, and it's a sign of healing as well, I think.
Appreciate you saying that. I think at the time that I made this, I was careful to never say who this person was.
Yeah.
Just because that just felt like a very clear boundary that needed to be enforced.
Yeah.
But like I think if you were writing personal material, about someone you have known or been involved with, you can at least assume that they will hear it or read it, and that they will know what you're talking about, and that their family and their friends are going to know what you're talking about. And it's tough because that can lead to making less honest creative work, and it can lead to making kind of surface level or sort of empty creative work.
Yeah.
But you do have to be careful of that, because you are essentially saying, I'm the historian here. I'm the one saying how it happened.
Yeah.
And that doesn't come without consequences.
For sure. But I think it's just amazing to hear you reflect on it, and it's like you wield that artistic power almost with responsibility, and it's really important to think in those terms. Pyro actually says, the Antlers music is my personal therapy. I relate to that a lot. I think hospice helped me. Music therapy, it's a very real thing. So yeah, at the very least, I would stand by that. Therapy itself is really important. It helped me, obviously.
Yeah, also go to therapy.
Go to therapy, but also music. Therapy can be expensive. You can't always have access to it. So go therapy, but music that, like I say, I genuinely listen to wake to kind of like, it's funny, it's like a computer. You kind of hold the reset button, and going through the emotions of that album, I think, at least in my brain, it helps level things out again. So it's great for there to be an album out there, I think, like that is like that, and it's available to listen to anytime.
True.
Now, you've worked on some amazing music that is outside of hospice, and obviously this is the anniversary, but I would always hate to kind of characterize the Antlers as a one album band when I've loved so many of your albums. Like I think Familiars, there's so many high points on. Burst Apart is a beautiful record too. So just to speak briefly about a few of your albums after, Yeah, Burst Apart, and I think especially the song "Putting the Dog to Sleep" on that record is so special. Like, how do you look back on that record?
Um, it's a mixed bag for me personally. I think that I was listening to it a couple of weeks ago to because they are repressing the vinyl.
Yeah.
Because I think it's been out of print for a second, and so they needed to repress it. I had to do a close listen of it. Hadn't listened to the album in probably 10 years. Sonically, I think it's really interesting because we were throwing so many ideas at the wall, and the record is really dense. There's so much going on. There's so many overdubs.
Yeah.
It's also somewhat a snapshot of us as a band, which we hadn't. Hospice really wasn't a band record. I did almost all of that record myself, and it was kind of crafted to make it sound like there was a band, but there wasn't really at the time.
Mm.
Burst Apart really was the work of a band, and a band that was trying to work democratically. And what that meant was kind of always saying yes. So it's a very dense record. It's a very texturally interesting record, I think, and stylistically it's like all over the place, which I think is cool.
It's creative.
Yeah, it's like there's a song that's sort of like a synth pop song, and then there's like a trip hop song, and then almost like a putting the dog to sleep is like a 50s throwback.
Yeah. It's funny, you mentioned Merryweather Post Pavilion earlier in the interview. Do you think, in a way, Burst Apart is your Merryweather? Because maybe you came into it with a lot of success, and I think Animal Collective were like thinking, let's make something that's very like synthy, maybe a bit poppy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were trying to make a pop record, but Merryweather maybe was more committed to that.
Yeah, my girls and the lyrics.
Well, yeah, and I think the aesthetic is really consistent through Merryweather, and I think that Burst Apart really jumps around stylistically.
Yeah.
It's sort of pop through various filters and generations of pop music, and then ultimately kind of just becomes Antlers again.
Yeah.
It's like Cocteau Twins is in there, and
definitely. I mean,
I don't know. I'm trying to remember the other references, but I think that it was us wanting to try things. It was us really not wanting to be boxed in by Hospice and to try and kind of make the anti-Hospice, which I look back on now and I understand where we were coming from, but I think I had a chip on my shoulder about being seen as a bad guy, and it wasn't reflective of what my life had become through the course of Hospice becoming popular, and so I had a bee in my bonnet about it. And we all did, I think.
Yeah, you didn't want it to become your creep, like for Radiohead, for example.
Yeah. And I think just like defying expectations. Hospice also being just a really confounding record to know what to do next after. I think it's the kind of record that is like a last record in some ways. Like they made that record and then they never made anything after that.
Yeah.
Because what do you do after that? So I think we had so much enthusiasm for trying new things, and we hadn't made a record together, and we had been a band now touring around the world for a little while and wanted to just try stuff. So on that level, like I listened to it and I'm like, there's so much creativity in here, and there's so many there's just this like overflow of too many ideas, but in a way that it's just like maximalist.
Yeah.
But when I think back to when I listen to what I'm saying on that record and who I was on that record, and the personality that's in it, and the sort of almost the philosophy that's in it, it's an accurate snapshot of where my head was at the time, but it's not one that I'm particularly happy about, or one that I'm particularly proud of or want to revisit. Not the record itself, but just how I was presenting myself. It reminds me of a time where I was really losing sense of who I really was, and my priorities were really out of whack, and I was not taking care of myself. And I just was motivated by the wrong things, and so for that reason, it's a hard record for me to listen to.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I never, musically for me, like I really enjoyed it because it was the first album that came out when I was a fan of the band, and I remember listening to it on my blue iPod Nano, like on the bus to school, which I think dates it. But I guess in a way, after a really solid and kind of concentrated concept album like Hospice, artistically at least, without the aspects of the headspace you were in, having an album that is all over the place, it's quite freeing, whether you're listening to it or creating it, to then not go, oh, we have to stick to this theme and concept, but we'll go from like parenthesis to somewhere crazy like Rolled Together.
Yeah, I like how much it jumps around. That was liberating.
Yeah.
And I listened to some of those songs and I was like, that was cool. Like, I wonder, it's, we then like changed course after that record, but it's an interesting next step.
It is
in a discography, and I'm glad we did it.
What do you think the most underrated Antlers songs are? Are there any out there that you think deserve more love? I'm sure in chat people will have an opinion.
I honestly don't have a great sense of where songs rank for other people. With some of them I do, as far as like things that I try to keep as mainstays in our set.
Yeah.
Especially, like Putting the Dog to Sleep and Hospice songs and occasional other ones that I hear from people about.
I really like Shush off In the Attic of the Universe. And it's cool. It's kind of just the way it goes from like warped and discomforting to suddenly serene. But I don't think you even sing in that song, do you? So you couldn't just be like, no, you could do it as an interlude.
That was just kind of an experiment, yeah. That was like a kind of microphonesy experiment for me, of just like that sort of serene part where it sounds like I'm playing a guitar part is actually me kind of creating chords out of playing each note staggered across like 20 tracks or something like that.
Yeah.
And just lining them up in such a way that it sounds like it's being fingerpicked.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think Familiars as a record, I think as that one ages, I'll be curious to see how it kind of lives with people. And I've already been getting messages from people who have like, it was hard to tell at the time. I think that record was just kind of a lot when it came out, and it was lyrically really dense. But I think as people have sat with it for longer, they've kind of developed their own relationship with it. I haven't listened to it in a pretty long time, but I think that one is, I don't know if like underrated is how I would describe it, but I think it's kind of a big record in terms of just the what's going on inside of it, and thematically, musically, all of that. There's a lot to unpack in that one.
Yeah. I want to give the biggest shout out to Juge Vanny in chat, because I can't believe I'd forgotten it, but I'd forgotten about Undersea, which is actually one of my favorite Antlers projects. They said Zelda definitely deserves more love. I think Undersea is amazing. Like Endless Ladder and Zelda on those projects. It's like, again, it's like a stopgap between two albums, right? But in that track Zelda, you speak about like like a dream's dream, a copy's copy, and I always found that such an evocative and ethereal lyric. Is there a solid concept behind that song, or is it more about the ambience?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a concept behind that song, or that, I think of Undersea as an album, even though it's EP length.
Yeah.
I think it kind of speaks to a sort of detachment from reality that we were feeling at the time. Having spent so much time on tour and having our lives just totally upended by the success of the band at that time.
Yeah.
which can be a really alienating thing.
Mm.
And I think when you're on tour for a long time, it does feel, it kind of alienates you from society because you're sort of part of this traveling circus and you don't really live anywhere. You don't really have roots
Yeah, you're nomadic.
strongly
Hey,
anywhere.
you might say you were uprooted.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are kind of on your own trip, and you are sort of outside of all these places that you visit because you're just constantly passing through. And I think a lot of things about life had come to feel surreal because I had never in my wildest dreams imagined I would be living that kind of life of just traveling the world and playing songs and meeting people in far-flung places who knew the words to the things that I had written. And I think that Zelda was sort of kind of playing through the lyrics in my head, which I haven't listened to that one in a little bit either. But yeah, I think it was.
It's not a video game reference, is it?
Well, we thought the song sounded like the Zelda.
So it really
Zelda
is.
Music. Yeah, it was. And then
that's so cool.
And then that being mentioned, I was like, okay, well then that's a nice name. I'm gonna that'll be the name in the song because it does sound like that, and it's like sometimes you just land on an idea and you're like, I like that. I'm just gonna use that. I think it was a song about having that feeling of everything about your life feeling kind of unreal, and meeting somebody who shares that feeling.
Yeah.
But only being able to communicate to them through. It sounds a little bit too far out to say you can only communicate to them through dreams or through kind of like a psychic connection, but it's that was sort of the idea in the song. It doesn't mean that is necessarily something that I believe, but I think that was the sort of almost like sci-fi concept of the song of like in moving through a world where you feel like you are sort of outside of that world, that the only way you'd be able to communicate with someone who has that same feeling is through a different channel.
Yeah. There's some really amazing music on the Zelda video games, though. The OST, like Great Furry Fountain. Like I love that. I actually sampled that in a really rough demo I made. Have you played the games much then?
Growing up, I did. I haven't in a while. But yeah, like Ocarina of Time and the original Zelda.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I played. My friend had it on Switch, like the one that was more like open world.
Yeah, Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, that one.
Really
I played that a little bit.
I love that.
But yeah, gotta love Zelda.
Absolutely. Is Cold War ever going to be released on Spotify? Pyro wants to know.
It should be. I don't know why I haven't
Probably.
done that,
just go on right now, Peter. Just whip it out.
Say,
Spotify for artists. Just hit upload. That's how it works, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, why not? I guess there's a cover on there. I don't remember what the process for like releasing covers on Spotify is.
You need to buy the kind of whatever.
There's probably like a license you need or something, or I would just need to. Beach House would just need to sign off on that or something. But yeah, it could happen for sure.
I think just to close on Undersea, it feels almost at times like eco indie or like eco alt rock to me. The image of the water always comes in, and then the line on Drift Dive, like the planet drowns in 100 days. Were you thinking about climate change at all with that song, or is it more emotional?
I think I was thinking of climate change in terms of like we've only the sort of cliche of living every day like it's your last. But in that context it was living every day like it's your last because a freak storm might flood this entire city and might take everybody out.
Which in New York that does happen. I've seen some plots.
Yeah, I think it was Hurricane Sandy that happened right around the time we released that album, and it felt to me very like witchy that happened. Not that there really was significance, but that stuff had been on my mind, and I think just traveling so much during that time really kind of explodes your perspective on just how many people there are in the world, and how absolutely massive the world is. To just to kind of try and grasp that size, that complexity of just a city or even a town, but also the entire world. That was the kind of billion. It was a million pieces in a billion places.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that kind of just spoke to this idea of like, I can't believe I'm in a city I've never even heard of before, and there are millions of people here.
Yeah, that's amazing. Moving forwards to Familiars, which I hope is a happier album for you to revisit than Burst Apart. I really love this album, and it was, I saw you on the tour. However, I saw you at the Oobleck, and I think Intruders was which is my favorite on the album, one of the only songs you didn't play, which is, it sometimes goes that way.
I remember that. We just couldn't figure out how to play it live. I think we tried it once and we're like, this isn't working, and we never tried it again. But I have been playing it recently.
Amazing.
Playing it solo, and a band, a show we did as a band last year. So trying to get it back in the mix.
Add it back in. It's a banger. So yeah, how do you feel about that album now? I think it's funny that I listened to Director kind of directly at the same time as I was listening to Hospice to help me through my breakup, and there was something about Director that felt so triumphant, and it almost served as an extra epilogue to Hospice for me, because there's a line that goes something like, how do you expect your soul to send a whole patrol when you were too far gone for me to know where to find you? And then you have the lyric about wandering out alone to find the person and bring them back. So what's the thought behind that lyric, and do you ever connect it to maybe a growth from some of the content of Hospice?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'll just say that Familiars has a lot of kind of lyrical gymnastics, and I can kind of recognize that a lot of the lyrics are sort of a little bit circuitous and maze-like, but I guarantee they all make some kind of sense.
Yeah.
But looking back on them now, I'm like, okay, what was I trying to say? I think in that one, it really was about this idea of feeling estranged from yourself.
Yeah.
And trying to kind of have an intervention with yourself about, look, the way you're behaving, you gotta get it together, man.
Maybe referencing the Burst
Apart. All the way out here.
Was it referencing where you were at in Burst Apart then? Because you were speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It was, but it was also kind of spoken to a friend who was struggling with addiction, and it's a sort of about, the plain spoken way would be to say, look, man, I've come all the way out here to this kind of wasteland that you've been falling apart in, and I'm here to bring you home.
But isn't that beautiful after Hospice? It's because you've kind of swapped positions. You're now the friend who's helping the other person, and that feels maybe full cycle.
Unsuccessfully sometimes, but
yeah, for sure.
But it's also trying to help yourself. It's about trying to access some wiser version of yourself.
Yeah.
Who can recognize that you're far from who you really are.
Yeah.
And trying to make the case of it of that's a thing that kind of came about through learning to meditate. Was about this idea of the witness, and being able to kind of have this perspective of being able to see yourself from outside of yourself.
Yeah.
And regarding yourself with a kind of ruthless compassion.
Yeah.
I guess is the way that it's described.
And then going to Intruders and the lyrics on that, it almost sounds like you're talking about having a gun to defend your home at some point. Is that a literal lyric, or is Intruders another more abstract?
I don't have a gun, but I think the idea was. Let me kind of run through those lyrics in my head for a second.
I'm trying to remember them myself. I know it's like a gun or something.
I don't know if there were actually like.
Oh yeah, who am I without weapons, without defense to arm my guards against intruders? Well, this is my house.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's about, thinking of the house being kind of a metaphor for your true self,
Yeah,
a sense of home, and this being something that you need to protect. But there are always going to be these sort of outside influences that are going to try and confuse you about what is what you know to be true,
yeah,
and it's sort of about fortifying yourself against Trojan horses and things like that.
for sure. For sure. Lucas in chat has popped up with something that is amazing because I never knew it, but you covered a Beach House song. Because Beach House, I think they're my most streamed band in the last 18 months. So you're a big fan of Beach House then?
Yeah, I definitely was. I definitely was when I made that cover. Not a fan now. No,
they've fallen off.
No, they're still awesome. I just haven't listened to them as much. But yeah, that was Apple Orchard. That was the cover on.
Oh wow, debut album. Which that's amazing. And is it that from Cold War? Or
yeah, that was Cold War.
Oh, there you go. That's so.
Yeah, that record, their first record, I really burned a hole in that one too.
Master of None. Do you know The Weeknd sampled Master of None in one of his songs?
Oh really?
Yeah. There's a song called The Party. Listen to The Party and the After Party by The Weeknd, and obviously there's the Kendrick Lamar sampling of Beach House in.
Oh yeah, what did he?
Money Trees. He did Silver Soul, and reversed.
Oh
it.
yeah.
So that's really cool.
Silver Soul is an amazing song. But Beach House is great.
One of the stupidest things I've done on Twitch was I did a stream where I listened to every Beach House song from start to finish in one sitting, and I was actually so happy by the end of it. I was like, let's do it for a few more hours. I think they're kind of one of those bands where you can just keep going with them and not
for sure
be like fatigued.
Yep.
Which I think is really cool. And I think that really nicely brings us to Green to Gold. I mean, you had Need Nothing, I think, which is the most recent project, but Green to Gold, it feels like an album from maybe you in your happiest place. Do you think that's fair to say? You've grown a lot. And,
yeah, well, it started off being written as like, what would it be like to make a record, like a happy Antlers record? Because life is pretty good. Not that there was nothing challenging going on at the time. But
when isn't there?
Right, exactly. That's life. But I was taking stock of things, and I was like, how do I write a record where there's like everything's fine? What does that feel like? And I started thinking about albums that to me are very comforting, and they don't really have conflict in them so much. Or if they do, it's not what I'm hearing in those records. That was, like Astral Weeks or Harvest Moon, or like a lot of Yo La Tengo records. Those are records for me that I put them on, and I'm there's a kind of contentness about them. And I was like, I've never made a record like that, and I'd really like to, and that really speaks to what I've been listening to lately. It ended up becoming a record about something else, and about, I guess, relationships as people get older and as people grow apart and try to maintain connection with each other and closeness. And so I think the kind of contentedness, the sort of happiness, is what bookends the records. And then in the kind of meat of the record it's not exactly conflict, but there's tension, and there's difficult conversations with friends, with imagine conversations that friends are having with their partners, and me kind of observing all of it while also just kind of watching the seasons change and just recognizing this kind of natural process that's always going on.
Yeah, definitely. You're a band who, again, I think probably listening to a hospice a lot, it feels very anchored in New York. I've always wanted to visit there. I've never been. So what would your advice be as someone who knows the city so well to me? as a British guy going to New York for the first time. Would you recommend it? And I'd love to go to gigs in New York. I don't know if the music scene is still thriving, or if there's any venues you remember from the early days and would recommend.
Yeah, well, I mean, you should definitely visit New York. It's been the city for me for my entire life because I grew up not about an hour north of it, and I lived there for 10 years, and I don't live there anymore, and I don't go down very often. So there's some things that I probably couldn't advise on super well because I'm just not in it anymore.
Yeah.
But I would say like walk around. It's like the most walkable city I've ever been to.
Really?
And especially Manhattan. I mean, you can walk from Central Park down to Union Square, down to the Brooklyn Bridge, all in a day. And you'll see so much when you do. And you just, look for the parks, look for the neighborhoods that, you can check out the Lower East Side and the West Village and see spots that you'll recognize from a movie you saw, or if you are kind of like, if you've followed like the lore of artists that you really like,
it would be that. It would be
like exactly like
the
their
Strokes,
old stomping ground.
Strokes, Animal Collective, Grizzly Bear, the Antlers.
Yeah, exactly. Like you get off, go to Williamsburg and you'll be right where all those people were, but it'll look totally different than it did when they were there because it's enormous high rises now. But yeah, and there's still, I mean, tons of great music happening there. I'm not really sure what the go-to like small clubs are because I'm just not down there enough to know.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the places that we used to play when I was coming up are no longer around. But there's always new stuff popping up.
Absolutely. What's up, Fuddlestar in chat? Hello, Antlers fan here. Welcome to the stream, and hey, welcome back, Ellie, as well, with the soup and croutons. It's so nice to hear that New York is walkable, because I think in my head I had this idea, especially America, it's like everyone's got cars, it's very urban, and I for some reason I thought, oh, you wouldn't be able to just cross the big roads in New York. But my big thing in London is the underground is so like oppressive, and I imagine as the metro can be, it's nice to just walk in London and see what's around you and have a sense of space and moving rather than just being like in this little tunnel that takes you from A to B.
Yeah, I always loved that in London. Like I would just walk and walk and walk, and I'd like look for a park and be like, all right, this park is like it's like a 40-minute walk away, and I'm just gonna walk to it and see what I see along the way. And you can do the same in New York, and the trains are, the subways are kind of dingy, but they get you there and they run on time. And, and if you don't want to be underground, you can take the bus. But it's really a city that is like very easy to get around.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'll make sure I make a date to get out there.
Yeah, you should.
I need an Antlers tour so bad. I've seen Peter Solar stuff. So yeah, any Antlers tours coming up? And plans? Yeah,
so we are soon to announce a tour for later this year. It's not exactly a full band tour, it's kind of a solo tour. So I say we, it's like me, but I'm touring with another songwriter. That's in the US. I feel really bad that we haven't been to the UK or Europe since 2019.
Yeah, it would be since the 10-year anniversary, I'm guessing, of...
Yeah. We had a whole tour lined up for Green to Gold, and COVID just screwed it up, basically.
Animal Collective had that too. I had tickets to see them, and it was like, boom, whole tour cancelled.
Yeah.
Sucks.
Yeah, it sucks. I was disappointed. I love touring over there. I think definitely on the next record we will be coming overseas.
Yes.
I don't know what that will look like in terms of like the makeup of the group, but like that I'll definitely be over there in the next couple years. I would like to get over there before that. It's hard to tour when you don't have a new record out, because it's just hard to promote shows
for sure,
and not lose a lot of money because it's expensive for an American to go over there. But if there's a way to make it happen, I will definitely be
amazing
trying to do it because I love it.
And the most exciting point, I think a really nice place to wrap things, this new album, which you've alluded to, what can you tell us about it? Is there a name, and what are the songs sounding like? Are there any reference points you can give us that we'll know from previous Antlers or your solo work?
I can't give you a name yet.
Okay.
I think it does have a name, but I'm not going to say it.
That's fine. Save it for Pitchfork.
It's in pretty early stages now. But I've been writing it for a while. I had this period of time where I just didn't really want to make a record. I think it was after Green to Gold, and it was when I was working on these singles, and I just wanted to try out just doing song by song by song and putting them out without having them be part of a bigger piece, and just also doing things more frequently, and just felt like a good time to experiment with that. And then I felt like pretty satisfied with how that went, and didn't want to take a break from it, and had this album that was kind of I was itching to make, and I was starting to think about it a lot, and then I guess I finally, like, this fall, I started to really let myself dive into it. And it's been good to have a project like that again, like a bigger concern like that. And it's it's mostly written at this point. I do a lot of the writing in my head, and then I kind of find a way of capturing it, either just by writing things down or recording them. But a lot of the work is just I need to kind of just walk around in the woods and be thinking about how everything fits together, and taking notes as ideas are coming about. But it's largely figured out at this point, and I've just I've been starting to record it now. I just last week recorded about I went to I record pretty much everything myself, but I wanted to record on this really beautiful piano at this studio nearby, and I ended up going there and recording just piano for about 6 hours. And I'm currently going through all of those piano takes and kind of selecting the best ones, and kind of building the map of the record based on the piano. It's so I guess there's piano is kind of central to it.
That's amazing.
But it's also I think my voice will be pretty central to it.
It's not an instrumental album. You're not. Who was the rapper who did that recently? Who just dropped a whole flute instrumental album? You're not.
That's Andre.
Yeah, the Andre 3000. So you're not going to do an Andre 3000.
No, I already did that with Cowboy Sadness. It's not instrumental, but the voice, I think, will just be a focal point in a way that it hasn't been in a little while. A little bit more like the way Impermanence was.
Awesome.
It's not going to be as like minimalist as that record, but I think it will be very like voice front and center, and very three-dimensional voice. And I think it will have a bit more of a electronic feel to it.
I'm really liking what I'm hearing here as the recipe, actually.
Kind of samply. It's a dark record. It's really I thought when I made Green to Gold, I was like, I'm just gonna make like pleasant music from now on. And then I started working on this record, and it's very dark. It's pretty intense.
Wow.
It's heavy. Not in sound yet. Maybe it will be in sound, but it's it's just it's gonna be, it's kind of an intense record. And I think like the recent albums that have been kind of in my mind while I've been working on it were the last two Low records. So Double Negative and Hey What, and the last Lika Lee record. I don't know if you've listened to that one much.
I do know Lika Lee. I might recognize one or two songs of theirs, but it's funny because Fuddlestar said in chat, "Is it going to make me cry, Lamau?" So I'm guessing the answer is probably yes. Then, if Peter let's go into the intense.
I hope so. I don't know.
I hope so.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's kind of a that I haven't really listened to Legally that much, but her last album it's mostly just her voice up front, and then all the music is pulled very far back, and it almost sounds like This Mortal Coil or something.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful and unusual sounding. And I just found that record really striking, and so that's been kind of in there. But like I was saying earlier, like Kid A and Amnesiac are kind of part of it too, and it's
oh wow, this is like I'm seeing a Pitchfork 100 just before my eyes. It's materializing. The more you say,
I don't know about that, but
we'll see what they think.
That's kind of easy to say, but yeah, I mean it's we'll see. It's in some ways in very early stages, but I hope people like it. I think subject matter wise, it's a departure for me. It's kind of about, it's a little more topical without being political, if that makes sense.
That's very interesting, because that's new ground for Antlers. I don't think I've ever heard one of your songs or your solo records that feels very like, oh okay, that is in the current climate. I can place that.
Yeah, I think the idea is it's sort of about the planet. I don't know. It's ecological and
more eco
and not exactly a like rosy picture of things, but it's just something that's been nagging at me and wanting to write it, and it's coming together. So
wow, that sounds incredible. Lucas in chat also asked, "Are you a fan of the band Black Country New Road?" You heard of them back in the UK?
I've never heard them, but I've heard of them.
Okay,
quite a bit. I think we might be label mates actually.
What labels are you on? Are you still on Transgressive? You see, because this is cool. Yeah. I love Transgressive because they have Foals as well, who are like another one of my favorite bands. So I just was talking to them about awesome. Antlers and Foals, nonstop.
Yeah, Transgressive is wonderful. We've been with them for a very long time. Yeah, so I think Black Country New Road is with Transgressive now too, but I'm not really sure. But yeah, I've been meaning to check them out.
Yeah, so definitely, I'd recommend. I really like the first album. There'll be some. If you really love Arcade Fire, the second album's quite Arcade Fire, but the first album's kind of like Allen Ginsberg, spoken poetry, post-punk, and yeah, I really love it. So
awesome.
worth checking out.
Nice.
Thank you so much for this experience, Peter. I think most people in their lifetime would be very lucky to be able to, sit down with one of their favorite artists and speak for 10 minutes. So to be able to talk for like 2 hours here with you it's very like life affirming actually, with a record that means as much to me as Hospice. So thank you for being so generous with your time, as well as everything.
Oh man, Tim, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on here, and everybody who's been tuning in and sticking with us and asking questions. Yeah, this has been fun.
This has been awesome.
Really enjoyed the conversation. Great questions and
thank you.
Lovely conversations. And thanks.
I would love to play any Antlers song that you would like, or one of your solo songs as an outro. Whether you want to pick one from Hospice or not, are there any that come to mind where you think, yeah, I'd love to play that?
What about the last track on Green to Gold? I feel like it's just a nice little like outro to Equinox.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Peter Silverman. You guys probably already follow Antlers and Peter, but I will put their details in chat. Can't wait for that new album. In fact, are we looking 2025 or later this year for that album?
I think 25. I had ideas that I was going to put it out this year, but then it's just going to take me longer than I thought, which is how it always goes.
It's one of those. So we'll have GTA 6 and a new Antlers album next year. It's going to be a good one, I think.
That's a big year.
Big year. Peter, thank you so much for everything. Thanks, and take care. See you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Wow. Just like that. This is the Antlers with Equinox. What a moment, guys. That's the best interview I've ever done, I think. 2 hours, that's beautiful. It's just like a podcast at this point. I'm not going to be able to stop smiling all evening. I'm so glad that I'm able to do this and share the moment with you guys.